Hello, my name is Bill Damaschke, and I just want to warn you, we actually have drinks, so anything could happen tonight. This is called Inside the Studio, and I think what I'm excited about tonight is the opportunity to actually chat with 4 of the leaders of our studio, and not just leaders of DreamWorks, but really leaders in the industry of animation and film. And between them, I think they have almost 100 years of experience in film or animation.
We're very old.
And they're leaders in visual effects, in production design, and in animation. And I think that as we talk tonight about the creative at our studio and the collaboration that goes into making animated films, the experiences that they share together and individually will be very illuminating to all of you about really what goes into creating an animated film. And also just thinking about our studio as we now are at 20 years. When Jeffrey started DreamWorks Animation, he set out to create an environment that would be fertile soil for artists and filmmakers and technicians to come and create and tell stories and create images and actually share their voices and their diverse, unique experiences through filmmaking with the world. And I'm actually excited to have the team here today because they actually represent a very interesting cross-section of both the world and also of our 2 studios, because when we talk about inside the studio, we actually are 2 campuses. We are in Glendale, California. We have about 1,700 people in Glendale. And then in Redwood City, up in Northern California, we have another 450 people. And those 2 groups together, of all of that, 1,600 of those people are actually artists, people who are working on films and making films. And so it's a very artist-driven and very artistic culture that we have at the studio. We released our first 2 films within months of each other. After starting the studio in 1994, our first films came in 1998. Ants and Prince of Egypt came out in the same year, one in October and one in December of the same year. And actually, Kendal worked on Ants, and Doug and Christophe and I all worked on Prince of Egypt. Jason is the baby here. He's only been at the studio for 10 years. So I think just to get us started, I think it would be great for each of you to kind of introduce yourselves, talk about how you came to DreamWorks and just what your background is and some of the key highlights of the things that you've done at the studio. So, and at the end of the night, Kendall's going to present a single rose to who does best on the panel tonight. So, Kendal, why don't you start?
Okay. Oh, let's see. I was an art student, so I draw and paint, and I worked as an editorial illustrator for many years after I graduated from art school, and really had no intention of doing animation until I got a call from a friend, a teacher actually, who had been asked to art direct Tim Burton's Nightmare Before Christmas. And I had just moved to San Francisco, and it just so happened that my personal kind of illustration style was very similar to how Tim drew. And so they hired me, and I got in. And so it was Tim Burton that kind of got me in. I was a huge fan, and that's why I did it. And I realized once I was there that, not only could I draw and paint like I always did, but I could build models, I could, be involved in being actually down on those cool miniature sets and painting them, doing scenic, helping with the lighting, working on puppets, and then it was shot on film for the world to see. So it sort of fulfilled all these great, artistic aspirations I had, and I got completely hooked. So from there, and that was actually Jeffrey's movie. Mm-hmm. And I've kind of worked with him my whole animation career, which is kind of funny. I went from that to James and the Giant Peach, and then joined DreamWorks after that film to do Ants. It was an incredible time in animation when all that happened. And I remember the studio, Skellington Productions, where we were working on those films. Half of us went to Pixar and half of us went to DreamWorks. There were two exciting studios in our area and in LA that were happening at the same time. It was this brand new medium that we knew nothing about. And I actually went to DreamWorks mostly because of Woody Allen, because I thought it would be really cool to do a Woody Allen film. And, it's been a great environment, and I've stayed ever since because of the creative environment there. Yeah.
Great. Doug, do you want to?
Sure. I had both a circuitous route, but also I can honestly say I've worked in entertainment my entire career. I started as a theater usher at the local movie house when I was in high school, picking up popcorn, cleaning gum off the seats, and stuff like that. But I also remember the point where I really got into the entertainment, the media business. I was looking for a summer job that was maybe a little bit more than that. And I was 16, 17 years old. I just gotten my first car. I needed to make car payments and insurance and that sort of stuff. And I was trying to explain to my mom that, well, I like computers, I like to draw, I like art, and I want something that'll combine those two things together. She's like, that's nice. Here are the classified ads. Go find something realistic. And so I start going through the classified ads. I'm like this, see, computer production artist right here. And sure enough, there was a small multimedia company in San Diego that was colorizing black and white films, and they were hiring entry-level positions for people who had basic drawing skills and understood how to use computers. And I went and applied to it and found myself colorizing black and white movies for the first year of my career. I never left though, and I never left that side of the business. Actually, that led me to opportunities working in animation at Amblimation in London, which is an incredible opportunity for me to go and move there when I was 19 years old. And I took it, I grabbed it, I ran with it. I worked on 2 feature films there at Amblimation, and just as Amblimation was closing, that was Steven Spielberg's animation company in London. Just as Amblimation was closing, DreamWorks was starting up. And I remember the day that Jeffrey Katzenberg came over and actually recruited a whole bunch of people from Amblimation. And what so impressed me was that he met in small groups of like 3 or 4 people with every one of us that he wanted to invite over to DreamWorks to tell us what the studio was about and what they were founding, and invite us to come be a part of it. And it just to have someone at that level of the studio sort of personally meet with you in such an intimate way and tell you what they wanted was just really exciting. And the idea of starting a new studio, the idea of challenging, the way of thinking about how we're approaching movies and what kind of movies we're going to make was incredibly appealing to me. And so I came to DreamWorks in summer of 1995, and the entrepreneurial spirit, the enthusiasm, the excitement has kept me there ever since. I feel like I've always had new opportunities, and it's just something I've never even considered not doing.
Jason?
Sure. So I kind of got into the industry through a not really roundabout way, but I started getting into it when I went to university. I didn't have very good drafting skills, so I went to UC Santa Barbara, which is not really known for its art or filmmaking capability. It's known for drinking. A lot of drinking. UCSB stands for You Can't Study Buzzed, from what I understand. And I was taking communications classes, so I was doing a lot of psychology and sociology and understanding how to kind of create a message and transmit it to people. And I would be in like 800-person lecture halls. And one of my roommates was a phenomenal painter. And so I'd come back from class with books and things to read, and he'd come back from class covered in gesso and paint with pictures of naked people. And I thought that was a way more fun college experience than what I was having. So I took a Photoshop class and absolutely fell in love with it. I just found it fascinating and amazing and a lot of fun. And I loved animation my entire life. So I actually got The Illusion of Life, which, how many of you have read The Illusion of Life before or heard of it? It's an amazing book kind of about the history of animation. And my girlfriend at the time hated animation. So I'd go into the bathroom so I could read it. She'd be like, "What are you doing in there?" "No, it's really, I had a big burrito. I just loved it. And luckily, a company that was in Santa Barbara was making 3D animation software called Wavefront. And right at the time when I was looking to learn more about animation and really get into the industry, another company called SGI bought them and a company called Alias in Toronto and merged the two together. And they created an animation package called Maya. They were just getting started with that, and they needed interns. So I interned at Alias Wavefront, learned how to use Maya, and then would travel to different studios to go and teach the artists there how to use it, and then come back and give information to the developers about what artists wanted and what they didn't. So I got to go to DreamWorks and got to go to Sony and Disney and DreamQuest and all these places just to meet artists, which was phenomenal. Amazing, amazing experience. And then in about 1999, there was a small company making a little independent picture or series of pictures called The Lord of the Rings. Some of you may have heard of it somewhere. They were in New Zealand and they needed people who knew Maya. So I went over to New Zealand and worked on all 3 Lord of the Rings pictures, which was an amazing experience, doing live action and learning really about how to animate in a production studio. And then after doing that for about 4 years, I really wanted to push my skills in more of a cartoony style of animation and really just enjoy that aspect of it. And luckily DreamWorks was hiring at the time. So I came over right at the end of Shrek 2, and my first project was Madagascar, which was awesome. Super, super cartoony.
Yeah, you're the king of King Julian.
Yeah, he was a lot of fun. He was great. I loved King Julian.
Yeah.
He was super fun to animate on. So, and then I've been there ever since, 10 years ago.
Great. And Christophe?
So first of all, I have to apologize for the accent, you know. But if everything goes well and if you guys listen carefully, I mean, by the end of the lecture, you should be fluent in French. So cool. So yeah, I grew up in south of France, so really far away from Los Angeles. So I'm going to tell you the path to make it to America. So I always drew when I was a kid, and I discovered I did a lot of stop motion. You know, when I was a teenager, you know, I bought some plastilin and do a lot of stop motion for myself, and you know, plastilin actually melt under a lamp. So I learned really fast that, you know, you have to use other materials. And luckily, you know, when I was 15, I went to an art school. It was a boarding school, so I was, you know, living, sleeping there, and we learned a lot about art at the time. So it was a great school, you know, learning about photography, illustration, you know, live drawings, and you name it. But that's not what I wanted to do. I wanted to do animation, but again, you know, south of France, you know, to do animation is not the best place to, you know, to be, and didn't have any idea, you know, how to do it. I come across, you know, Illusion of Life as well. I remember the only problem is it was a really expensive book. There was only one book into one store, and I didn't have the money for it. So I remember that I had to hide the book somewhere, you know, like in the store somewhere, you know, and you know, and. You know, I was collecting my money, and every 15 days I was checking if the book was there, and I was just come back in a month. And finally, yeah, after a month, you know, I did collect the right money, and I bought the book, which I read carefully. And because I read it carefully and I was tracing all of the drawing inside, you know, I got into the school called the Goblin School. It's an animation school in Paris. And, you know, it was really the beginning of the animation world right here, you know, great school. They actually don't teach you anything, which might make it a great school. You know, they just hired a lot of people. I mean, it's a really tight selection of artists. You know, they give you an assignment and they come back 2 weeks later. You know, so the emulation. I mean, like all the students, you know, being together and working together make the movies that we made. You know, which was really a funny way to teach, and I always loved it actually. Then after that school, you know, I got hired by Disney. And I thought it was a treat at the time, but I hated it. I didn't like Disney whatsoever. It was really, you know, it was Disney France at the time. They had a branch in Paris, and really pretentious. And everything that we learned suddenly, you know, they told us, you know, put that in the gutter. You're going to start from scratch. You know, I'm like, oh, in 2 years of animation, there's no way. You know, so you know, stayed there for maybe 2 years. Worked on a Goofy movie and the beginning of Hunchback, and I resigned from Disney. Someone hired me at this point. It was my teacher from school, which I got along really well. His name was Bibo, and worked at, you know, DreamWorks after for different movies. And really, Bibo gave me the chance really to, you know, reinvent myself and to be really free. And his company was based on, you know, we had to do commercials and work like those, you know, and with those money, you know, it was basically half for the company, half for us. And when we had enough money, you know, he was embracing the fact of doing, you know, short and personal project, and it was exactly what I needed. Therefore, you know, we did those commercials, and when we had enough money, we did personal project. So I did with a friend. I did something really silly. I mean, I have an episode, but I don't have it here. And but that episode particularly actually received a lot of attention from a channel in France called Canal+, and they hired us to do 30 more. But right at the beginning, I did 3 episodes of those. DreamWorks called Bibo at the time, asking him if he wanted to come by to to DreamWorks and check it out. They were opening their doors. It was '96, and it was for Prince of Egypt. And they asked Bibo as well if he knew some people around that would be interested. And it's good because there's always a part of luck, I have to say, in career like that. There's a lot. It's about work, and there's a chunk also that suddenly the stars in position, and they're smiling for you, and it happened for me. So Bibo asked me to come along, so I took the plane, went to the States with my big portfolio, and got hired at the time for Prince of Egypt as a layout artist. So it was doing, those big drawings in graphite, and I actually loved it. I learned a lot on that movie. That and El Dorado was really the movies where I really learned all the craft that I'm using even today. And I've been there since, and I can call DreamWorks my home.
Aww. So I think what's interesting, I would just point out about PDI, and maybe I'll ask Kendal to talk a little bit about this, but PDI, which is our studio in Northern California, we're all DreamWorks now, but at the time had been doing visual effects and commercials. Mm-hmm. And it was a company then that, through the relationship with DreamWorks, was reaching to do its first computer animated feature. And at the same time, in Glendale, we were making hand-drawn 2D films, traditional animation that had a lot of computer elements in them and a lot of CG effects in them. And Doug, you were there, and Christophe, you were there. And so I think it would be good just, kind of think about the beginning. What was it like, and what was happening in the industry at the time, and what's really changed over the years, and maybe what stayed the same?
So PDI is Pacific Data Images, was one of the early CG houses, one of the first 2 maybe. So they would do things like the spinning logos for Entertainment Tonight and stuff. That's what they were really good at. And
those were awesome, by the way.
Weren't they?
I watched them every night. Yeah, they were amazing.
Yeah.
Inspiring.
But then they also did that cool Michael Jackson video with the morphing of the faces.
Black or white, right? Wasn't that?
Yes. And a whole bunch of like the Simpsons special.
Homer 3D.
Homer 3D, yeah.
Pillsbury Doughboy as well.
Pillsbury Doughboy, yeah. So I got there as, I drew and painted, and I worked with puppets, and I got there as an art director on Ants, and the production designer came from ILM. He had worked on Jurassic Park and all that kind of stuff, and neither one of us, I didn't even have email. They had to show me how to do email. It was really weird. So we had this project called Ants with a script, and the directors had worked at PDI. They came from PDI. They sort of grew up there. So they knew about CG a little bit, and the producers knew about it. But we didn't, and we were creating the world that was going to be built in this medium. And I remember asking them, do you want us to design for the computer? Because I don't really know how to do that. And the thing that they said, and I think about it all the time because it's true to this day, design what's right for the movie, and we'll figure out how to make it in CG. And for me, that's always been very exciting because it means that it's the creative vision that has pushed the technology from day one. So whatever we try, we have aspirations to do creatively, all the people that are responsible, all the R&D people and all the technology people really work with us interactively to kind of figure out how to bring that to the screen in computer graphics. It's always been that way, and it's always been really exciting. But yeah, that was 1996.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And Doug, from the 2D DreamWorks side of that?
What I remember about the earliest days of DreamWorks, when my first week at DreamWorks, I got off the plane, I went into work, and it was the week of SIGGRAPH. Anyone know what SIGGRAPH is? So it's a very large computer graphics convention that moves around different places in the year. And it was there in Los Angeles that year. And literally, I didn't go to work. I went to SIGGRAPH and sort of checked in the studio and then went down to SIGGRAPH. And what I remember is that DreamWorks had a big recruiting party and a bunch of other things that were going on that year because we were growing rapidly. We were trying to get lots of people. And everyone that was at the studio was so excited about it and so enthused about the idea that people used to accuse us of drinking the Kool-Aid when we were at the recruiting parties because we'd be telling them about how cool it was and you really got to do this and it's really great. And people were like, I don't know about that. But the enthusiasm was genuinely infectious, and it was a place that had such a tight-knit community. And I remember things like the First Friday parties. Every week we'd have these things. It was just great bonding opportunities for all of us to come together and just have time to socialize in the studio. I remember just everyone was so excited that we were working on a project that was different and unlike anything else that had been done before. And everywhere you look, people were trying to push the boundaries, and it was pushing the art of 2D animation. It was pushing how we applied the technology to the process and the filmmaking. And I just remember that time being so vibrant and alive and so excited about what I was doing and the people that I was working with around me and how it was challenging me and teaching me and all these things all at the same time. It was really wonderful. And I think, much like Kendal said, focusing on the art first, I think that's one of the things that I really liked about it was this incredible collaboration between technology and artistry, and this idea that we were trying to tell a story, we were trying to make beautiful art, and it was whatever we could utilize to do it. It wasn't precious about one technique or another. It was really just about, this is the story we want to tell, this is the visual that we want to accomplish. Now, what's a creative new way that we can do it?
You mentioned collaboration, and the exhibition is actually, one of the things I really love about the exhibition was this idea to tell the story in a very non-linear way and take a holistic look at story, character, and the worlds that come together to make our films. And I think we probably all would agree we're all really in service of the story. That is actually the first and foremost thing. But there's some really critical collaborations that go on, and actually up here are some of the critical ones. And I actually thought I would ask you guys to talk a little bit. There are two collaborations that I really know that are big intersections. There's the production design and the character development and animation. It's really about the design of the character, how the character moves, what it looks like, and how it functions in the world. And then there's also the intersection of visual effects and production design, which is, what will it look like? How will we make it? How will we achieve it? What will the effects be like? How will they be designed? And then how will we actually make it all work inside the film? And so I thought maybe talk a little bit about collaboration and how that works, and maybe Jason and Kendal, since you worked together on Madagascar, and that's an intersection that you guys have worked in, maybe talk a little bit about that very important process of bringing the character to life.
Sure. Do you want to start, or should I? Or should we do it at the same time and collaborate, like every other word? Art always starts.
Do you want
you
me
say
to
the
start?
first word.
Well, that's a great question for me, because that was a hugely important time. When we made Madagascar, so we had just come off the Shrek movies, and they were, Shrek was designed very realistically, really. He and that was the intention. He's built with basically bones and muscles that really work like they do in a human being, and the world reflects that as well. And we got this script for Madagascar that was just hysterically funny, broad comedy. And it came at a time when we all were having lots of discussions about, we just want to make a cartoon. We grew up with those cartoons. That's why we're here. We loved those as kids. We want to bring that to this new medium and kind of reinvent it. And so Madagascar was that vehicle, really, for that. So hired an incredible character designer at that time. His name is Craig Kellman, who we knew he loved animation, the classic animation, the Tex Avery style animation from 50s and the 60s, and we were really looking for something like that. And he added a modern twist. So he also designed the Powerpuff Girls and Samurai Jack. So he brought, all that incredible design ability and understanding of animation from the past, and then really kind of figured out a way to make it contemporary. So we hired him, and immediately, really out of the box, those 4 lead characters came, and he designed them together. So the lion, the hippo, the giraffe, and the zebra. Very little changed on those guys from their first sketches, and you can see that in the exhibit. But along with that was animation style. It was incredibly important to us that we brought in, again, all the stuff that was so great in 2D animation and how characters, the squash and the stretch and the exaggeration and the cartooniness and that caricature and fun. And Craig's philosophy was, if you don't design a realistic lion, nobody expects it to move like a realistic lion. And it was sort of our philosophy going in. And we believed that this would work, but we didn't know. So we built it in 3D. And I'll never forget the first animation test we did on his face, where we pulled that thing all out of whack. His eyes were bulging, his mouth was he smiled, and we pushed it up to here, and he squashed and he stretched. And I remember we were all standing around the monitor just going, oh my God, it works.
And that's just like getting the characters to do that is actually a really difficult process, especially back then. Nowadays it's, oh yeah, you just hit a few buttons and it makes it, sort of.
Yeah.
But back then, we hadn't really done anything like that before. All of, with Shrek, like you were saying, he was very believable and realistic with all the muscles, and like his eyes were spherical.
Yeah.
They couldn't squash and stretch. And to actually have a character whose eyes could stretch like this, but then keep the pupil and iris circular was a problem that hadn't been solved.
Yeah.
And so we wanted to make sure that we could do that. And I think that it was a lot of iteration to get the rigs to be that flexible. But then once we were able to do that, it's so much fun to animate because you could do anything. You could have the character's head over here on one frame, 2 frames later have it over here, and then in between you'd like stretch the jaw and the head, and you'd have these eyes like going, bleh, and it would just have this great like whack sort of feel. It was amazing. It was so much fun to do that.
Yeah, it was a really exciting time. I remember when we were rigging Marty, and Marty, he doesn't just smile, so it isn't just, we've got his head and we raise the corners up, under the eyes, and then if it's an open mouth smile, he just hinges here and opens and closes. What we did was, and we do this when we draw, we smiled him, and then we basically broke the jaw and dropped it so that he has this incredible cartoony smile. And to try to figure that out was really challenging.
Yeah.
But, yeah. Everybody was so up for it, That's what I mean by technology really supporting the creative. It's just really exciting and collaborative.
Yeah, I think with that collaboration comes a joint vision of what you're trying to achieve. So I think this happens between all the departments where you get together and you realize that there's no egos about, well, my department is designing this and this is the way it's going to go and that's what it is. It's sort of like, well, we have this idea. Do you have this idea? And you go, yeah, I've got that idea and this one. And everyone sort of holds hands and skips along to figure out how you're going to make it happen. And quite often you're like, I don't know where we're going, but this is going to be exciting. And it's fun. It's like we do that with with layout and animation. We do that with all the effects, with everything. It's a really great way that we all just sort of aim to try and make everything better with each step through the process.
Great. And then maybe Christophe and Doug maybe take the other side of it, which is how the whole world is coming together. You guys work together on B-Movie and recently on The Croods, where the movie, the world was a character in the film. There's a lot of challenges that go along with that. So I don't know if you want to talk about that collaboration and how that comes together.
I can start.
Yeah.
I can talk about The Croods a tiny bit, about the world. Everything we do, you start from a blank paper. There's nothing comes out of a wizard heart. So And you'll see like tomorrow, if some people are there tomorrow, we're going to show you, the breakdown of how we start and how we do it. What can I say about the world? So yeah, the particularity of Crude, for example, was the fact that on the script, when the directors gave me the script, I read it and I realized that, yeah, there was no nemesis. It was a Jurassic time, that we had to invent, by the way. I didn't want to be relevant to the actual Jurassic time, because I am actually from an area in France where they are really big on that. And I know I would have made mistake, and it would have been impossible for me to go back home. So we decided, let's be loose about it. It's an era that doesn't exist. So let's call it the Cretaceous. It's a good alibi, and let's make it, same thing as Kendal as well. I grew up with a lot of American cartoons, and I just wanted to have fun on a daily basis. I don't want to spend my time on books and, being really tight. So, the looser, the more freedom I had. Therefore, I didn't want to second guess myself or anybody else. So we decided to go loose. Then read the script and realized that yes, there was no nemesis, no bad guys into the movie. The world was coming to an end. For that event called Pangea, the world was collapsing. Therefore, we decided that the world itself would be the bad guy into the movie. So we did design the movie accordingly. And that's really important because I think every movie is designed differently according to the taste, to the energy of the script as well. I worked at the beginning of Kung Fu Panda, and that was definitely a different take, so you have to respond to the text as well, what you read, and get the energy of it. And by the way, making movies is also a lot about limitation. Build your own limitation. Like everything is possible, and it's almost overwhelming. Therefore, I just started right away to do like a Bible, and to work on the limitation. Therefore, the trees are going to be like that, the rocks like that, the lines, the perspective, the camera will, my rules, my own rules for this particular show like that. I'm not going to drift out of it, and it's going to be really easy, but nice. So yeah, the work was a character on its own. So we decided that the work had to be really whimsical, topsy-turvy, really round, and that was an alibi for us to. We did that like that. We could be surprising for the audience, meaning that we could hide creatures, in the nature, and you wouldn't see it until the animal, jump at you, for example, or moves. If the world would have been really streamlined, like it is, for example, for Madagascar, which is different rules, animals would have pop up, and you could have seen them. So we decided to be really organic, really organic. And again, it's because it's a world that built itself. It was, we called the Cretaceous. It was at this time of being a teenager, so creating itself as it comes, pretty clumsy, whimsical, like teenagers are. And so yeah, we went. We started to do that. We invented the trees. We invented all the plants. And the challenge, of course, was to make sure that it doesn't feel like it's coming from a sci-fi movie, on a different planet. So again, that was another limitation. If you pass that line, if you feel like that plant doesn't exist on planet Earth, then you're wrong. So and to do that, we had an easy trick, which was just putting palm tree everywhere and you're good. Palm tree, everybody knows it. So it's
something recognizable.
Yeah, exactly. Every time, palm tree, it's fine. And that's pretty much it, because the relationship between characters and the world for Crudes was easy in the sense that for me, being consistent is really important. I didn't like, for example, someone to design the characters not knowing what the world was. So I did launch the character designer and the people in the team of Crude, with the same. I took like an artist as a template that I really like. It's like an independent Argentinian artist, but he has a really particular way to draw that was really fitting well for the Crudes. And I did launch those teams, with the same template, making sure that it was really consistent, to make sure that the characters were fitting the world, properly. And yes, that's it.
Christophe and I worked together very closely on B-Movie, and it was an incredible learning experience for me, because I'd just come off of Shark Tale, whereas we had some similar challenges and aspirations with the animation performance on Shark Tale as Madagascar, and we pushed those boundaries as well and sort of worked in some of those areas. But our texturing and our lighting and stuff was really going for fairly sort of rich, realistic kind of quality to things on that film. And when we started working together on B-Movie, it's the first time that I'd worked with Christophe, and I realized right away that his sensibility for color and his approach to light and how light would interact with surface was very much that of a painter, not necessarily that of a photographer or a cinematographer at the time. And it completely fit the sensibility of the movie and the style of what we were making, but it was really hard to do with a computer. Computers were, most of the software that we use in rendering was all designed to simulate light in a very realistic, or at least attempting to be realistic way. And so, for example, some of the things we do is Christophe would come with a painting and he would show, I've got this orange bee, but I want to put him in a dramatic lighting situation. I want to shine blue light on him, and I want that side of the body to turn blue because it's blue light.
I'm sorry, I never apologize for it.
I try to explain, but physics, additive light, you shine blue light on orange, there's no blue in it, it doesn't reflect, it actually just turns black, and he'd go, but I paint it blue. and it wasn't, honestly, it wasn't, perhaps he was feigning ignorance, because I know he actually knew better, but I think he was just waiting to see what I would do or how I would actually come up with a solution for that. And that's actually what was fun, was figuring out those solutions. And to tackle those things, and it was like this stylistic treatment of color, which she developed a completely new set of rendering tools that allowed us to color the surfaces with the light we were shining on them. We created something called tint lights that would maintain all the surface texture but replace the local color with the color of the lights automatically. So now you could shine a blue light onto an orange bee and get a nice blue fill or bounce or rim on it. And it's completely non-physical, totally unrealistic, and it looked awesome. We had lots of similar challenges in the design of the film too. In Central Park, which is a big part of it, it's beautiful design. The best way I could describe it was sort of the shapes for the trees were like cotton candy or lollipops. So it's very elegant arcs to the branches that would come out, and then they'd have these simple oval shapes and groupings of leaves on it. And up to the date, we had all these great algorithms for growing trees on movies like Shrek and things like that were very realistic and lots of branches, and they'd produce leaves, and they just, you could make this tree. Well, that's an oak tree. It's clearly an oak tree, but that's not what he wanted. And instead we had to change our approach completely and make it very, very sort of hand and art directed, and we couldn't build all those leaves, so we ended up developing new tools that would model the branches, and they would model these simple lollipop shapes for what the trees were, and then we modified the algorithms to grow into those shapes instead, and try to find that synergy between the artistic sensibility and stylings, and yet supporting it with a technology that lets us still create the world we want, but create it with a sufficient level of complexity that makes it believable and makes it tangible. And that's actually another thing that I really learned from Christophe as we went through it, is that it's not about reality, it's about tangibility, it's about believability. And that's how we sell a world that we can tell a story in and still make it something that's fantastical at the same time.
All of you, started as artists and trained to be artists and filmmakers, and you've all ended up in these leadership management roles. So I'd love to talk about a concept that actually the two words together sometimes don't make sense to me, managing creativity. And I thought it would be good for you guys to share. We make these films that take many, many years. Hundreds of people work really for you on the film to get to that final release of the film and the final product and the final vision that you are out there setting. How do you balance, the day-to-day of being a manager and an artist, and also managing a lot of other creative people?
Are you starting with me? It's challenging.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
When you start, you usually become an art director or a production designer because your artistic skill is really great. and your leadership skill is, you know, usually at the bottom. And, you know, I do this for people there's this graph that I always do where it's like an L shape. So, you know, artistic skills up here at the beginning and leadership skills down here. And then as you move up and your leadership skill goes up, sometimes your artistic skill, because you spend so much time working with people and working with creatives and not as much time drawing and painting yourself. So it's, you know, usually where you get to that point where those two things cross, you have a major psychological break. And then you have to decide, you know, how you want to go. But so it's always something that we kind of struggle with. But what's great about the process, you know, it takes sometimes 4 years to make these movies. And what's great about it is the beginning of the process, we actually do get time to draw and paint and to be our old creative selves, you know, in a very hands-on kind of way. And that's the conceptual part and the early dreaming part, and that's really exciting. And then you bring on an art department, and you work with this smaller kind of creative team made up of visual development artists and set designers and character designers, and you start to really hone what the look of that film is. And then, you know, about a year in, you start getting into production, and that means that you're overseeing the development of the look of this film through all the other departments. So I'm working with modelers and surfacers and lighters and people that do the hair and how it moves and clothing. I mean, everything, effects, we work with everybody. And so right until it goes on the screen, and in fact, we even kind of color time the screen. So sometimes we're the first on and last off on these productions. But it does have this really great creative journey where you're so collaborative at the end, and you know, the film is turning into something you didn't even quite imagine in the beginning because of all these incredible artists that come on and give their piece of it. And then you still have the beginning where you can still be that creative self. So it's a great journey. It's fulfilling. Yeah.
I found that the challenge for me was like when you start off, just like what you were saying, Kendal, when you start off as an artist, you're really responsible for the work that you're creating. And people look at the work that you're creating, and if it's good, you get a big thumbs up and you feel really good. And if it's not good, you get a helping hand, and then it gets better, and then you feel really good. And you just keep iterating on your own stuff. And then all of a sudden you become a manager, and you have to switch your mind completely from being responsible for what you're creating to being happy and proud and supporting the team around you. Mm-hmm. And some people are able to do that, and some people have a really hard time doing that. And the thing I actually found really great at DreamWorks was they provided a coach who would come in and sit down and be like, so, what's up this week? And I'd be like, oh my God, well, bleh. And then he would be like, all right, cool, let's talk about that. And he helped me sort of make that transition. And it's really wonderful. Once you sort of turn that corner and you realize that your whole job is to help the artists with you become stronger and better and grow over their careers, it becomes really inspiring, and it becomes like that's an artistic achievement in and of itself. And it becomes very uplifting and a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Good. I can absolutely relate to that critical point that Kendal is talking about, where you have that break. Mm-hmm. When I first became a supervisor, I fought tooth and nail against that sense of responsibility. Not because I didn't want the responsibility, but because I really didn't want to let go of that hands-on piece that Jason was talking about. And it was really, really difficult for me to make that transition from feedback every day. And it's instant. And the beauty of it when you're doing the work yourself too is you don't even have to have someone else come in and tell you whether it's good or not. You can see it. You can press the button a little brighter, a little darker, and you're like, oh yeah, that's better. and you feel good, and you go home with this little endorphin kick. And it's like, and when you're managing a team, it can sometimes be days or weeks before you see the progress of the team or the people, or a way to reflect on whether your leadership is what's doing that, or if it's just you got lucky with a bunch of good people. And
it's always leadership, Doug. It's always leadership.
It's always, yeah.
and at some point, I went through that same critical stage, and I don't know how. It was probably a lot of the coaching and the other aspects, but I did get through it, and I found on the other side of that an incredibly rewarding place where it is now about mentorship and guidance and actually creating opportunities for people. And now I can reflect back on mentors and supervisors that I had when I was an artist working in production, and thinking about the opportunities they created for me and how they taught me and how they sort of guided me and mentored me in that. And I try to now do that for the people in my crew. And I now have the distance and perspective to understand when that's being successful, and when you see people rise and you see them achieve things that they didn't even think they were capable of, or you find ways to challenge them and motivate them, that is super rewarding, and I really love that aspect of it.
We'll take some questions in just a minute, so if you have anything or you want to think about something, I have one more just question to ask. So then you get to that point after you cross that moment you talked about. Then you get to the point where you're actually like really good at your job, and it's that last 6 months or 8 months of the production where you're making the movie and it's going great and you finish it, and then this other thing happens. I ask you to go do another project after that. I would love for you to talk a little bit. Christophe, you're about to go on to Croods 2. Kendal and Jason are about to start new projects, which you're free to talk about here. What do you do when you start? Like, you're faced with the blank page. You're faced with sometimes a new team, a completely new script, new characters, new world, expanding a world that you were working in before on the sequel to Croods that Christophe is working on. What's the first thing you do? Jason, how do you approach the next project that you're working on?
I love this phase of the projects. It's everything's possible. What I usually do is, besides thinking about reference and things like that, I actually put up a big board in my office, and I write at the top, success for the film. And I just imagine, what is wild success mean? And I picture myself 5 years from now, looking back at the production, and I think, that was the most successful film that's ever been done at DreamWorks because this happened. And I just write down all the things that happened in my mind. Amazing collaboration, the artwork was ready, the story was ready, like everything was just fantastic. The director was really, really pleased with everything we did. The animators, when they came on, nothing went wrong ever.
What film is
I want to
that?
work on that movie.
I know, yeah.
I want to work on that one too.
Yeah, it's like, new animators coming on the show knew exactly what to do. We had mentors. I just make a giant list of everything that I think went right. And then I look at where we are, which is basically a little box of nothing. And I go, all right, what do I need to do to make sure that happens in 5 years? And I just start making connections. And I go, oh, okay, well, if the animators, I want to make sure when they come on the show, they're totally prepared. Well, what does that mean? It means I need to understand the characters' motivations, because that's really important for the animators. To be successful as actors, we need to know where the characters came from. Okay, so how do I know the characters' motivations? I can ask the director. And I make a little note, ask director, what are these guys thinking? And I just do that for everything. And I end up with this giant list of stuff to do. And then I start prioritizing and figuring out when that stuff needs to be figured out by. And I end up with this map of what my plan is going to be as I get ready for production. And that takes this daunting task and makes it something that's really, really achievable. And actually a lot of fun, because then animators can come by and look at it and go, what the heck's that? And I'm like, I'm glad you asked. What would be good for you if, And it's a fun process of just letting your mind kind of go crazy and think about what would be awesome, and how you can make it happen.
I'm working for you next. I like it.
Come to my side, animate for me.
Christophe, you're starting just recently on Croods 2. What's your first steps in your process?
Well, a sequel, I have to say, is not as daunting, than starting a really new movie from scratch, but because, the style is somehow, there, and the philosophy and everything. Nonetheless, doing a movie, the first Croods took me 5 years, from the beginning to the end. So it's an overwhelming task, and you mentioned it already. So what I'm going to talk about a little is I'm going to give you an analogy that I'm using on my daily life. Is I don't know if you guys are familiar with that movie. It's called Touching the Void. It's more like half documentary, half movie of something that occurred in Peru, with that team of 2 people. And one guy cut the rope, the other guy fell into the ice and didn't die, so therefore he had to make his way back. And when he's on the crevasses, he managed to get out of it. He has a broken leg. I mean, everything is really tragic in that story. And when he finally gets out of the ice, he has to come back to the base camp. And he has a broken leg, he's really armed, and the base camp is really far. And for me, I look at the end of the movie a bit of like that base camp, That base camp is really far, and there's no way I can make it, especially if you have a broken leg. So on the movie, the guy says, he thinks at least, that if he can achieve, he looks at a rock that's just 100 yards from where he is, and look at it, and that becomes his target. And so suddenly the base camp is not the target anymore. This is the rock that he can see basically. Therefore, it's achievable. And he said himself, if I can achieve that, then I'm good. I don't want to think about anything else. Goes there, and maybe after 45 an hour, 2 hours, reach that, and again give himself another goal. Therefore, he made it. I don't want to tell you. Watch the movie. It's actually. No, it does. But so I'm using that on a daily basis. Since I saw that movie, it really does help me in my task, in my daily task. That I don't really think at the end of the movie. I'm trying to have an overall vision of what the show is, and trying to stay put, and making sure that the crew is always sailing onward and not drifting, because that's our goal basically. It's also, being the captain on the ship, and you don't go down roaring and go back up and just look where you are. You manage your team accordingly. And yeah, I build those micro goals, and those are simple. I take a notebook, really small notebook, and I write stuff that I need to do, step by step. So it's easy for me and it's easy for the team as well, because I launch them. I tell them, in 1 week, we just make that tree, because people are living in that tree, and we check the sketches. Nothing fancy, nothing big, nothing really scary. We don't paint at this point. Just take your graphite and we check it out and we go from there. So that's how I work.
Kendal, any process thing you want to share?
It's so funny. I close my office door and I curl into a fetal position. I don't really know what my process is. I don't know if I even really have one, to be perfectly honest. I think I read the script and just kind of start dreaming really about it. I personally, I really love finding that thing that's unique to the story, and that something new that I have never done before. I like to challenge myself and all of us, the crew too, I think a little bit. So it depends. I don't know. Mm-hmm. I go down different roads depending on what it is. I usually start by, gathering reference, looking at art, watching movies, getting out in nature. It just depends.
Fashion, photography, you pull from every single part of the world.
I do, yeah. And, different types of art forms, and so it depends.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So we could take some questions if anybody. Oh, great. I think we might have a microphone, unless you want to.
Look at that. Lots of questions.
Yeah, they tried to warn us that you would be really timid. So far, so good.
Yeah.
Hi. Whoa, it's loud. I liked what you were saying about the collaboration, where you're getting the blue light right because it was in your painting. Sometimes you might look at pre-visualization, concept art, and sometimes you can't see it in the end result of an animated project. Like with Prince of Egypt and Road to El Dorado, the background paintings have been painted and they're in the final feature. is there any point as an artist in the past or anything where you have worked on a concept, worked on a development and the look, and it kind of hasn't come through in the end result, or is it what you see, you're just amazed that it's actually developed in CG and you like the look of it? So yeah, have you sometimes not seen what you've developed in the final project and been a bit disappointed as an artist?
I can answer the first part. Really good question, by the way. Because we're facing that, constantly. By the way, there's a lot of translation, and again, making a movie, it's a lot of people around the world, with different tastes and everything. And at the end, what I learned, at least, from all of that process, and you don't have to get exactly what you had in mind. And most of the time, what you get on the screen is actually different, but better than what you could have imagined, And I'm basically trusting the process as well, And I like those happy accidents. I like the fact that, working on a movie is pretty organic. It's not like, following a Bible and turning the page every day. It's really just an organic system that you create and you make your own. And yes, we do painting sometimes that are not exactly what we're going to achieve. But, if you put it on paper, that means you have it in mind. So you have something in mind, that's relevant to the storytelling. Therefore, if you do the translation and you're not as tight, what do you pull out of it? What do you, what is the genesis of that, of the core, basically the fluid, from what you had in mind that wasn't on a painting, or that was on a painting and doesn't appear, But, I'm getting way looser, getting older and, having a bit more experience, I think, with that kind of problems. Because you make your way, and technology evolves, tremendously as well. So what wasn't possible 10 years ago, it is nowadays, and thankfully, I don't know anything about technology, but that helped me, at least to put, the vision on the screen. So, it's getting better and better, and definitely, therefore, closer and closer to your vision.
I actually want to answer that just briefly. I think there's sort of two ways to look at that too, which is exactly what Christophe was saying. There's whether you've achieved the literal translation of what the art is, or what I think was far more important is whether you've achieved the spirit of it, what it was actually trying to communicate, and if you brought that part of it out into life in some way or another. There's another thing that I personally go through at the end of every project, which is I always look at the project and I can still see all of the things that we didn't get to or that didn't get to do, and I usually wish we could have done more of. And that's a blessing and a curse, and because you can come to the end of it and go, oh, I didn't do this, and this. But it's also really valuable because it's constantly driving me as we're going through the process, is to make sure like, oh, here's a new idea. We should try that. We should keep pushing for that. We should never stop and give up and thinking you've come far enough, because you'd always be pushing it a little bit farther if you can. So you got to balance it with recognizing what you did accomplish all along the way and how far you've come when you look back on it too.
Yeah, there's both for me. I'll give you an example. So for Madagascar, designing those characters, we designed them very much 2D, like I was saying, very, retro style. But it was an amazing experience we actually sculpted them in clay first, because we didn't know, what the point on, when Marty's back goes like this up to the hip and there's a point before it transitions down along his butt, like what is that point, when you build him in 3D? And so to realize that in 3D and then look at him at those little clay sculpts that are in the exhibit, and we're going to keep that edge, we're going to keep that point, it works, that's actually taking it the next step to 3D from a really cool drawing, but so it sort of reinvents itself in a really great way, and we're trying to stay true to it. The thing that drives me crazy about Madagascar, and it probably always will, is Alex is on twos, Gloria, and then what's the deal with Marty?
We animated him on twos, and he looked like he had a giant beer belly.
But you know why? Because we built him to be on fours. Yeah. There was a long conversation about Marty, and then Melman too. But you'll see some of the sketches downstairs where they're on twos too, and they're built, drives me crazy. But so there's both. There's a little bit of both. Yeah.
I was just really intrigued by the nature of collaboration as you introduced it, because we didn't get to the director until we got to Jason's phone call right at the very end of the talk. So what is the role of the director in your collaboration?
Yeah, the director, for animation, we meet with the director usually twice a day, which is pretty great. So what we'll do is, as we get ready to launch into a sequence, and a sequence of this film is usually about like 2.5 to 3 minutes worth of screen time. We'll meet with the director and talk about why is the sequence in the movie, what's important about it, what are the characters going through over the course of this entire sequence. Because animation takes a really long time, and everything that's in there is considered, and it's there for a reason. Otherwise, it wouldn't be there, because it's expensive to put stuff that doesn't need to be there in the movie. And so we'll talk to the director about that, and then we will be working on that sequence for usually about 8 weeks of time. And so we'll meet with them at least once a day, if not twice a day, to find out if we're heading in the right direction, get notes and get feedback. And there's a lot of just iterative collaboration with them on that. And that's pretty much true for every department, is you'll meet with them when you have something to show and you need notes. The nice thing about DreamWorks is that it's different from visual effects studios, is where you have the director in-house with you. And you can call them up if you need to. You can meet over a video conference, or you can meet in the same room, depending on if they're in the LA studio or in the PDI studio. And they're always there and ready for giving us feedback. Sometimes sooner than we'd like, but but it's always very, very valuable.
Just wondering how much the vocal performances, hi, I'm here, sorry, how much the vocal performances affect the visual performances of the characters.
A lot. Actually, the vocal performance is extremely influential to what we're doing. For those of you guys who don't know, they record the voices first, which is amazing, because we have the actors go in and they record the dialogue. And then when it's handed over to animation, we'll sit there and listen to it over and over and over again to get sort of the cadence or the rhythm and the texture of the way the actor is speaking. We also do something we call a lipstick cam, which is a camera aiming directly at the actors' faces, which is probably disconcerting for them, but I guess they're good with cameras right here. And you can see, how they're moving their faces around and get some ideas for some acting choices. So that's kind of the texture of the voice, and the visuals that we're getting are useful. The texture of the voice more so than the visual. And what we'll do then is we'll go and actually shoot video reference ourselves. And if you go down to the exhibition or come to the masterclass tomorrow, you can see some of the video reference tests that we do. And the reason why we do that is we want to explore as many different ideas as possible as how to be honest and truthful with the performance that we can. So by trying just a bunch of different things when you have to do an action, so that you don't end up with the cliched action that you've seen before, we'll just shoot reference and have the animators act it out, and then take that and show that to the director and say, what do you think? Do you like this or a combination of this? And whenever the director will usually say, okay, that take 5 is good, part of take 2, and then merge in a little bit of take 3, and then why don't you try this other thing? And then we'll take all of that, and then again keep listening to the voice and keep listening and listening to eventually pull the performance out.
Thank you for being here today. I'm here.
Got it.
This question is open to anyone who wants to answer. Picasso taught us that the purpose of life is to find out what you love, and the meaning of life is to give it away. For Jeffrey, it was laughter, but what is your purpose and meaning of life in animation?
That's cool.
That's a good one.
That's great.
Provocative.
Yeah.
For me, I can start. Actually, for me, it's funny. It's freedom. I don't know if I'm answering the question actually, but I need to feel free. I need to make sure that when I go at DreamWorks every morning, that I don't have a weight upon my shoulder of someone looking upon me and expecting, from me to do something that I'm not good at or not comfortable, or because I learn, through the years that the more free, the more who you are. Basically, at the end, it's a bit cliche, and the better it is for me. So I always work according to trying to reach my freedom, and I can be stubborn with that as well. Even when I'm working, and when I think about something and I think it's great, then I'm going to fight for it. And that comes to your question a bit earlier, but there's some stuff I fight for tremendously, and other that it's a bit looser for me because it doesn't have the same. I can live with it. I can sleep tight at night, and so. But for me, that will be the answer. Aha.
Freedom.
Top that, he says.
That's why I started.
I think mine. I'll take mine.
Yeah.
Mine is compassion and empathy. I think our movies absolutely have to be funny, and I know that, and that's definitely up there. But I also think we strive, and I know I strive in our films, and then also in life, to portray characters that are compassionate and have empathy for each other, and create characters that an audience can see themselves in and have empathy for. And I think that is, in some ways, one of those core human to human kind of interaction, and yet even not human to human, just with animals sometimes, and in storytelling. And so I think trying to portray things with empathy and with compassion, I think, is a very important aspect, and making people laugh very hard while you're doing it. But I think that vulnerability that goes along with that's probably mine.
So I think for me, part of what I love getting out of working on movies is to be able to make stories that can go out into the world and have a positive impact on people's lives. When I meet someone and I tell them what movies I worked on, and they tell me about their favorite moment, or what it meant to them, or what it meant to their family, those are the kinds of things that are special to me and make me feel like, okay, this is the purpose, this is the reason to be doing this, not just because I actually like what I do every day, but because I'm contributing something positive back out into the world.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Do you have another question?
Yeah, I'll never forget the day when War Kimball said that Shrek was the animated movie he was expecting to see in 2001. Then a 3D version of Frank Thomas and Ollie Johnson told in The Incredibles there's nothing like an old school. And now I think that DreamWorks had an evolution with Mr. Sanders' talent. And, the way The Rise of the Guardians deals with dreams way different from the way Shrek deals with the fairy tales. And we have, of course, Paperman, a lot of experiments. Now, my question is, what, as a digital designer, I should expect in 2015? Coming back to the Tex Avery or Hanna-Barbera style, meaning 2D, or 3D going 2D, or we're still dealing with 3D and we're trying to conceive new ways to represent this new kind of storytelling, this broad and family version from the crudes. And really, I'm starting animating here after studying communications, but I really wondering what I should expect from the next future, because I'm entering this world now.
So I just really feel like we're babies in this business, It's so early. And, we've discovered some really cool stuff, but there's just an immense world of challenge out there in this medium, and I think we're just at the tip of the iceberg on it. For me, it's really the story that's going to sort of fuel where I go with it creatively, visually. Right now, I don't know how much I can say, but I'm playing with an idea using sort of practical mediums to pull into CG again in a different way. And I don't know if that's the future, but it works really well for this particular story that we're telling. And it does push the technology again. And that's always really exciting. So I don't know where we're going to end up, but we're always trying to push it. Yeah. Yeah.
So I think I'm getting this. This is what I'm getting.
It's a helicopter. I don't know what that means.
So I guess that concludes our discussion for this evening. Thank you so much, and thank you to my amazing, wonderful colleagues that I get to work with. I love you all and love working with you, and loved hearing you talk about what you do tonight. Thank you.